Bava Kamma Daf Bet, beauty in actions, bi'ra deshittit mine. There was a time, until not that long ago, where art was beautiful. Whether it was music, the music was beautiful. Whether it was painting, the paintings were beautiful. Poetry, the poems were beautiful. Now it's not always so. Sometimes the art seems to be exceptionally ugly. And artists will say, we're reflecting what's happening in the world around us. But that's not really the function of an artist. The function of an artist is to link what they experience in the world around us with an inner soul and with something higher. That's what an artist is, surely. I don't need an artist to reflect what's happening in the world. I can see what's happening in the world. I need an artist to give me a different dimension, to introduce the harmony that he or she experiences through their own souls, and by linking their soul and the events of what's happening around them to something much higher. And with that understanding of art, art is not restricted to objects. It's not just a beautiful painting or a beautiful piece of music or a beautiful sculpture. Art can also be in action. Our actions can be artistic. Our actions can be harmonious. Our actions can be beautiful. We are artists. And we're expressing ourselves, and we're expressing something higher every time we do anything. That's why a maaseh is such a thing as a maaseh mitzvah, a mitzvah, and created out of an action. An action is something so powerful and something potentially so beautiful if we, as the artists of our action, infuse these actions with that beauty. And in Perek HaChovel so far this week, we've been dealing with this a lot, that there are certain situations where the action itself is the problem, not just the implications of the action, not just the outcomes of the action. We've had a situation where boshet is a problem, causing somebody shame, even if the other person can't feel the shame. We talked about an Eved, where Rabbi Yehuda says, Ein le'eved boshet, that boshet doesn't apply by a slave in that situation, and yet it's asur, even though there's no payment, there's no legal payment. But the action is an ugly action. To shame a person, even if the other person doesn't feel the shame, is inherently ugly. We'll use that idea to understand the Gemara before us today. I want to dedicate this shir to Rav Horowitz and to Ilan, and Grant, you help the people who, when I'm away, take over the shir and enable me to be away, whether it's on vacation or for work, and be relaxed, to know that the shir continues. And to you all, to the regular participants, having to give the shir while I was away just to a camera, you can't imagine how difficult it is. And I realized even more, I realize every morning, but I realized even more how much you add to the shir. And when any one of you are absent, I feel it. And it manifests, it shows up in the shir itself, because your presence is very inspiring. Each one of you brings another dimension of presence to the shir, and all the hundreds of people who listen to the shir benefit from your being here in the mornings. And it's something that I appreciate, and I would like you to understand how valuable and important that is. Rabbi Bar Mari was an Amora in Eretz Yisrael. He was in Israel at the time of the development of the Talmud, and he learnt with the great authorities in Israel, and later on came to Bavel. And when somebody came from Israel, came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylon, the Amoraim, the authorities in Bavel, were always very intrigued to discuss things, to compare. What are they saying in Eretz Yisrael about this matter? And they would talk. Rabbi Bar Mari was a Baal Machshava and a Baal Musar. He was a philosopher, and he was an ethicist. That's where he put his focus. When he came to Bavel, they were intrigued with him, and particularly Rava was intrigued with him. And if you remember when we talked about the difference between Rava and Abaya, and we said Abaya was much more philosophic in his approach. Rava was much more halachic in his approach. And for Rava, the fact that there's a saying going around that people say something which sounds good, it's a slogan, it sounds good, is not enough for Rava. Rava wants to know, is there a makor? Is there a source for that in the Torah somewhere? And so when Rabbi Bar Mari comes to Bavel, Rava befriends him. They become very, very friendly. We see that in Gemara in Brochus Daf Mem Beis. We see Rava entertaining Rabbi Bar Mari and them talking and discussing things. And in our Gemara, Rava asks Rabbi Bar Mari countless questions of popular sayings and their source in the Gemara. Is there a source for this? Is this something real, or is this just something that people say? And one of the ones that he asks is, Manaha milta de amri inshi bi'ra deshittit mine lo tashti bekala. Where does it come from, the saying that people say that if you've drunk from a well, don't throw a stone into it? Is that real? Is that something that has a source in the Torah? Amali, so Rabbi Bar Mari says, yes, tichtiv, lo teta'ev edomi ki achicha hu v'lo teta'ev mitzri ki ger hayita be'artzo. You shall not despise and reject an Edomite because he is your brother, he comes from Esav, and you should not despise an Egyptian. Despite the terrible things that the Egyptians did to you, you shouldn't despise them. Because you lived in his country. He was your host for a period of time. And in current terminology, just think how difficult this mitzvah is. So we will say, we're already, buddies with the Germans. We haven't forgotten what happened, but we've gotten over with it, and we're all buddy with the Germans. It was only 75 years ago. Mitzrayim, that was certainly a long time ago. So we can relate to this mitzvah. But think of it in current terms. Imagine if the Torah was saying, don't despise a Gazan. Don't despise a member of Hamas, because you were hosted by them while you were a captive. Really? Yes. Don't turn it into hate. You can kill them, you can do what needs to be done al derech hamishpat, and we had that some time ago in the Matmonim, that one has to separate the two. You can love somebody and punish them at the same time. There's mishpat, there's what they deserve, and there's your inner relationship to it. And to say, ki ger hayita ba'artzo. It's if you were an individual who benefited in any sort of a way, as difficult as that is to understand, don't turn it into hate. Act out of mishpat, but not out of hatred. Very, very difficult, very demanding mitzvah. And Rabbi Bar Mari says that's the source for the saying of don't throw a stone into a well from which you've drunk. Which is difficult to understand, because that's talking about humans. The well is inanimate. How can you learn from the din that you're not allowed to despise an Egyptian because you benefited from him, or an Edomi because he's your brother? How can you take that to the well? Is Rabbi Bar Mari suggesting that the well is just metaphorical, and you don't really have to be grateful to an object? It's just a way of saying. It's just a saying. Is that what he's saying, or is there something much deeper? And we'll see that there's something much deeper, and that there is. What Rabbi Bar Mari is saying, we learn from the case of Lo Teta'ev Mitzri, we learn that you can't throw a stone into an inanimate object such as a well either. There are two well-known approaches to this Gemara. The one is the Shirei Das, the Telzerov, in his essay of Kikol Bashamayim Uva'aretz, where he takes a mystical approach. He takes a Kabbalistic approach, and he says that even inanimate objects have nefashot, they have souls in higher places, and those souls have feelings. So although you could look at a stone, and you can look at an object, you can look at the table, you can look at the well, and you can say it's just an object, it doesn't feel anything, but in a higher sense, it too has a soul that feels, and a person of a high enough spiritual standard in this world is able to relate to the objects around, not only in its external manifestation, which is just an inanimate object, but also to the spiritual, mystical core that it has. Nested inside it is an energy, and that energy is able to feel your energy. And for you to act badly towards something from which you've benefited causes dissonance in these higher worlds. That's how the Shirei Das learns it. Rav Dessler in Michtav Miliyahu, in his essay on Ad Hechan Magia Hakarat HaTov, deals with it from an ethical perspective, from a Musadik perspective. And he says it's not about the stones getting upset or the well getting upset. It's about the effect that it has on you. You develop the midah, you within yourself develop the characteristic of gratitude, of hakarat hatov, if you are so careful that even with an inanimate object you don't do it. You're conscious all the time of not acting negatively towards something you've benefited from, then you'll be very careful never to act badly against someone you've benefited from. So it's a matter of self-development and self-training. But I want to suggest to you a third approach based on the way we've been learning Perek HaChovel. And that is, it's not about the action. It's not about the effect of it on the stones or on the well or on the Egyptians. It's not about how they experience your ingratitude. It's about the ugliness of ingratitude per se. An action which is dissonant with what has happened previously is an action that is not harmonious. It's not a beautiful action. It's not artistic. And therefore it's something that we suffer from. And to understand this, there's a beautiful and a very important piece in the Shita Mukubetzes about the Rimigash and the Rif. The Rimigash, you remember, was a Talmud of the Rif and a Rebbe of the Rambam's father. So he links our whole tradition back to the Rif. And the Rimigash was very active in building Torah in Spain based on the Torah of the Rif. And the Shita Mukubetza says, "V'chatav talmid echad mitalmidei harav Rabbi Yosef Halevi Zal ibn Bigash muatak milashon Aravi." One of the talmidim, one of the students of the Rimi Gash, wrote the following in Arabic. I'm translating it, he says. Amru b'sof hachovel bi'er deshtit minei lo tami beikala. They say at the end of hachovel that you shouldn't throw a stone into a well from which you've drunk. Perush abo sheshti minei lo tashlich bo even o davar acher. Klomar, lo tezalzel bo, don't deal cheaply. V'lo tigmolo Torah, and don't do something bad. Achar sheneheneta mimenu, since you've benefited from this. So we see clearly in the Rimi Gash that this is taken literally. We're not talking metaphorically to apply it to human beings. Even to the physical thing, one shouldn't do it. V'zeh derech mashal l'shar advarim, and this applies not to other things too. Shemi shebala adam mimenu eze toelet o neheneh mimenu ein ra'ui lo la'asot shum ma'aseh sheyavo lo nezek mimenu. If you've had benefit from something, we're talking about a thing, don't do anything that could cause damage to that thing from which you've had benefit. Not for the reason we're suggesting of the Shirei Das, of the mystical higher element. Not for the reason of the Michtav Miliao, of the idea of the Musar effect on you. But because the action per se is just despicable. וכבר הביאו שם בגמור על עניין זה משלים ופסוקים בעניין מכות מצרים וגילו הסיבה שנעצו קצתם על ידי אהרון. And we've got, being in the Rashi's further down, the cases of why the water wasn't hit in the plague of Dam by Moshe, because Moshe benefited from the water. Why the sand wasn't hit for Kinim by Moshe, because Moshe benefited from the sand. So we see there examples. It's interesting that Rabbi Mamri didn't bring those examples for whatever reason. V'sipei Rabbeinu Zal al Rabo Harif. And our Rebbe, the Rimi Gash, told the story about his Rebbe, the Rif. There was a situation where he was asked to sit as a judge in a case, and he recused himself. He was concerned that he might have to decide against that person. And he absolutely refused. What was the situation? He became ill, the Rif. And he had a friend who said, come, don't go to the public baths when you need to go to the bathhouse. I have a mikveh and I have a shower in my own home. Come to my home and just you'll have privacy. And look at the wording here. And he had benefit from that bathhouse. We're not talking about the man. We're talking about the mikveh. And he then invited the Rif to spend time in his home until he feels better, and gave him great honor, and he became better. That man then became poor, he went bankrupt, and he owed a fortune of money. And he had to sell the bathhouse so as to pay his debts. And the Rif said, Lo adun v'lo oreh b'merchatz hazeh. I will not judge or paskin anything to do with this bathhouse. It doesn't say anything to do with this man. He's not worried that maybe I'll find for him when I shouldn't. Maybe I'll be bribed. That's not the issue. It's about the bathhouse. I've had benefit from this bathhouse. I won't get involved in any discussion, in any decision that involves it. And if this applies to a bathhouse, how much more so it applies to human beings who feel the damage. And somebody who puts himself in a position to deal harmfully, even if justly, that's what's important. We're not suspecting that the Rif isn't suspecting himself that I'll make a decision which is not al-pi Torah, which is not just. But even with justice, if it's going to require you to act destructively to something you've benefited from, that is sanui, it's despicable. And it's outside of the realm of musar and derech eretz. This is not humanly decent. That's when the Gemara says you shouldn't sit in a court case as a judge for somebody you love or somebody you hate. Why not for somebody you love? I understand you shouldn't be for somebody you hate. You might find against them. What about somebody you love? The one thing is we're afraid that your relationship with this person might influence your reasoning, and you might find in his favor when it's not really so. But the other is, if there is a possibility that by really pushing the boundaries of law, you could find in his favor, and you decide to find the way the halacha is, to be strict with it and to find the way the law is. Even if as a judge, judging al pi halacha, you find against the person or the thing from which you've benefited, that would be mishalem ra'ah tachat tovah, paying with bad for the receiving of good. And if it's so with a human being, it's so with a bathhouse. How much more so with a human being? It's so with a human being. How much more so with Hashem? Look what we've benefited from Hashem. How could we ever do anything that hurts Hashem? How could we ever do anything that is mevayesh, that shames Hashem? How could we do anything that diminishes Hashem's glory in the world when we've received so much from Him? You're not even allowed to do that to a bathhouse. Even if it's al pi mishpat, even if you're paskaning halacha correctly, you still can't do it to the bathhouse from which you've benefited. How much more so to Hashem? What a beautiful piece from the Rimi Gash. And that, if we link that back to the Chofetz Chaim with which we ended yesterday, when the Chofetz Chaim says don't damage your body, don't smoke, because Hashem has given you your body as an instrument, as a tool. Don't misuse it and don't abuse it. Here, there's another reason for that. Don't do something which hurts Hashem Yitbarach. Hashem designed this magnificent body and gave it to you, and you've used it and benefited, and you use it and benefit every day, and you abuse it and you use it to do things that Hashem has said don't do. Whether it's abusing your own body or it's just doing things that are morally or halachically wrong. That's something that we don't do. And again, as we see clearly in this piece of Rimi Gash, it's not because the bathhouse is hurt by it. It's not because the bathhouse has feelings. And it's not just because of the musa that it'll make you a better person. It's just an action that instead of the action reflecting and expressing the beautiful harmony of the Bria, an action such as this is ethically and morally dissonant. It's ethically and morally ugly. And we should be careful that our actions are not only correct and just, but they also entail the beauty and express the beauty of the Bria and of Hashem who created it.